Okay, so I was in a coffee shop last week, right? And the woman at the table next to me, she's having this incredibly earnest, like really quiet conversation.
Hmm.
She'd laugh softly, then pause, type like mad on her laptop, and then nod, looking almost, well, relieved. Like she'd just gotten some amazing advice from an old friend.
Okay.
I figured she was in a really deep chat, you know? But then I glanced over. No video call, nobody on the phone. She was just staring at a chat interface.
Ah, talking to an AI.
Exactly. Pouring her heart out, getting life advice from a bot. And the weirdest thing, it didn't even look weird. It looked normal.
It is becoming normal, isn't it? We interact with them constantly.
We do. We talk to them, ask for help. We treat them almost like they understand. On the surface, it feels like just another kind of mind.
But it raises that fundamental question. What is actually happening under the hood?
Right. Because inside our skull, you've got this living, messy ocean. Saltwater, chemical sparks, 86 billion neurons going wild, and it runs on, what, 20 watts?
Barely enough to power a dim light bulb. Yeah.
And then inside the machine, it's this perfect, rigid city. Silicon, metal burning thousands, maybe tens of thousands of watts just to mimic the pattern of our thoughts.
That contrast is stark. The messy ocean versus the perfect power-hungry city.
They both use electricity moving through matter, but
Yeah.
does that make them the same thing? Is one just a really convincing ghost in the other's machine?
That's the core of it. They both process information, sure, but the how and the what it means, well, they seem worlds apart.
So let's really dig into that for you today. Our mission in this deep dive is to explore that gap. Is the difference between us and AI just an engineering problem we'll eventually solve? Or is there something fundamentally different about efficiency, about how function works, and maybe most importantly, about feeling, subjective experience?
Exactly. We'll need to tackle the energy side, first that massive power difference, then look at the shocking complexity we're finding in just one biological neuron, and finally, dive headfirst into that philosophical deep end. Consciousness, qualia, the hard problem.
Okay, so when we talk about intelligence, artificial or otherwise,
Yeah.
we usually focus on speed, right? How fast can it think? How accurate is it?
That's the common metric, yeah.
But the real bottleneck right now, the thing slowing us down, isn't really speed, it's thermodynamics. It's the sheer energy cost.
It absolutely is. That 20-watt brain versus the thousands of watts machine we mentioned. That efficiency gap isn't just a footnote. It's arguably the central challenge for the future of sustainable AI. Engineers are hitting a wall.
So this megawatt versus watt divide, can you put some numbers on that? Just how big is the difference?
Okay, so try to wrap your head around this. The human brain manages something equivalent to an exaflop. That's a billion operations per second. Think about that number.
A billion. Okay.
And it does this using roughly 20 watts. Your brain, right now, is doing that.
Wow. Okay. So what does it take for our best machines to hit that exaflop mark?
Well, you look at top supercomputers like Frontier at Oak Ridge. To get that same exaflop performance, it needs around 20 megawatts.
Megawatts.
That's a million times more power. A million.
A million times.
And this isn't just about the electricity bill, though that's huge. It's a fundamental physics problem.
Yeah.
The main thing holding back chip design now isn't making transistors smaller. It's dealing with the heat.
Right, the waste heat from all that energy.
Exactly. You can't pack the components tighter if you can't cool them down effectively. We're literally running up against the laws of thermodynamics. It's forcing engineers to think completely differently, to look for new blueprints.
And it feels like this massive inefficiency goes way back, doesn't it? Back to how we even started thinking about computing. We kind of modeled the wrong thing.
That's a great way to put it. Our entire digital world is built on foundations laid down by George Boole back in 1847 with Boolean algebra.
True or false? 1 or 0?
Precisely. He saw thought as these neat logical propositions. It was an abstract, clean model, completely divorced from the messy biological reality of the brain. And when engineers eventually combined that logic with electricity,
We got the transistor.
the transistor, which is an amazing invention, don't get me wrong. It's like the ultimate Swiss Army knife for computation, does everything. And we've spent decades making them unbelievably smaller, faster, more efficient.
Billions of them on a chip now.
Billions. But the architecture built on those transistors is the problem. It's fundamentally centralized.
Like that corporate headquarters analogy you mentioned.
Exactly. You have these incredibly precise transistors grouped in a central processing unit, a CPU or GPU. All the data has to be shipped into this central office, processed meticulously, and then shipped back out.
And moving all that data takes energy, A lot of it.
A huge amount. Even with super efficient transistors, the energy cost of just moving the data back and forth creates this massive bottleneck. The centralized model just can't handle the flood of data we have now without burning insane amounts of power.
So the realization dawned. Maybe we shouldn't be looking at the brain for its logic, but for its structure, its architecture. How did that shift happen?
It really took off with the wider acceptance of the neuron doctrine. The idea that the brain is this huge interconnected network of individual nerve cells. That wasn't always the dominant view.
Right.
But once that took hold, it led directly to people like McCulloch and Pitts in 1943, who created the first mathematical model of a neuron. That's the granddaddy of all modern artificial neural networks. The insight was, big data problems need big connected networks.
And that brings in this idea of quantity over precision, which feels counterintuitive for computing.
It really does. Traditional computing is all about getting the one perfect, precise answer. But in deep learning, inspired by the brain, it's different. An individual artificial neuron might be a bit sloppy. Its output might not be perfectly precise, but it's connected to thousands, maybe millions of other neurons. The network as a whole aggregates all this slightly fuzzy, low-precision information. The collective decision ends up being accurate because the errors kind of average out, and the sheer scale compensates for the imprecision of the parts.
And that's how we get AI that can beat Go champions or generate realistic images.
That's the power of the network approach, yeah. And here's the kicker. Even these brain-inspired neural networks, running on our current hardware, they still guzzle energy. Beating that Go Grandmaster took tens of thousands of watts.
So we copied the network diagram, but we missed something crucial about the efficiency.
We missed the brain's power-saving tricks. We modeled the connections, but not how the brain uses energy and time so cleverly, which leads us beyond the static network diagram to how neurons actually communicate using timing.
The timing of the spikes.
Exactly. Neuroscience started revealing things that didn't fit the old models. For instance, the human visual system processes an image incredibly fast, under 100 milliseconds.
It's really fast.
Too fast, it turns out. If neurons had to wait for lots and lots of spikes to add up before making a decision, it suggested something else was happening.
They're making decisions based on when the spikes arrive.
Precisely. Based on just a few precisely timed spikes from their neighbors. Think about a barn owl hunting in pitch darkness.
Okay.
It pinpoints its prey, using the tiny microsecond differences in when a sound reaches its left versus its right ear. It's all about timing, incredibly efficient timing, not raw signal strength.
And that biological insight directly inspired this race logic idea from NIST researchers. How does that work in hardware?
It's a really different approach to circuit design. Instead of encoding information just as voltage level 0 or 1, race logic encodes it in the timing of when those voltage levels flip.
So signals literally race each other?
Yes. You have signals traveling down parallel pathways in the circuit. The one that gets to the destination first represents the answer or the most efficient path.
Like runners in a race.
Yeah.
And the power saving, where does that come in?
It comes from stopping the losers immediately. That's the key.
Like telling all the marathon runners to just stop the second the winner crosses the line.
Exactly that analogy. The circuit is designed so that as soon as the winning signal arrives, it physically cuts off the power to the pathways of all the losing signals. They stop propagating instantly.
So you're not wasting energy letting them finish their computation.
Correct. You prevent all that unnecessary electrical activity and heat generation. Plus, by using timing, a single bit flip, which costs energy, can represent much more complex information than just a 0 or 1. Its arrival time carries meaning.
So this could be huge for problems involving comparing lots of options, like finding the best route.
Potentially transformative. Problems like shortest path calculations in massive networks or complex logistics, things that involve exploring many possibilities, could potentially be solved much, much faster and using vastly less energy. The brain's 20-watt performance is proof that this kind of distributed, time-based computation is fundamentally more efficient than our current brute force methods.
Okay, so the brain is way smarter with its energy budget. That's huge. But the story gets even more interesting when you look at the actual building blocks. It turns out our early AI models weren't just inefficient. They were based on a massive underestimation of what a single neuron can actually do.
Oh, absolutely. The early models, the ones that shaped a lot of AI development, fundamentally misunderstood the neuron, particularly as input branches, the dendrites.
They treated them like passive wires, right? Just collecting signals.
Exactly. The standard artificial neuron, the perceptron model, basically saw dendrites as leaky cables. They just summed up incoming electrical pulses and funneled them passively towards the cell body, the soma. The idea was that the real computation, the decision to fire or not, only happened at the soma if the total signal was strong enough.
So the dendrite was just kind of an antenna, not doing any thinking itself?
Pretty much, just a passive collector. But neuroscience, especially more recent work, has shown that's completely wrong. Dendrites are anything but passive.
What makes them active?
They are studded with all sorts of sophisticated machinery voltage-gated ion channels. These aren't just passive holes. They open and close based on the electrical environment, giving the dendrite itself powerful local information processing capabilities. They're computing things out there in the branches.
Local processing. So not everything has to go back to the central office of the soma.
Right. The dendrites themselves are performing complex operations. We talk about nonlinear complexity.
Nonlinear, meaning it's not just simple addition.
Far from it. Take NMDA receptors, for example. They're a type of ion channel found on dendrites. Think of them like a double-locked security door.
Okay.
To open it and let signal through, you need two keys at the same time. One key is the chemical signal, the neurotransmitter from another neuron. The second key is electrical. The dendrite itself needs to be already partly activated or depolarized.
No, it only opens if there's both a chemical signal and the dendrite is already primed.
Exactly. It makes the NMDA receptor a fantastic coincidence detector. It's not just counting inputs. It's checking if specific inputs arrive together in the right context. This allows for really complex, nonlinear signal integration right there in the dendrite.
Which means the neuron is way more sophisticated than just a simple summing device.
Immensely more sophisticated. And this capacity for nonlinear computation in the dendrites led to a really groundbreaking discovery involving the XOR function.
Ah, yes, the XOR breakthrough. This really changes the game, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Why is XOR such a big deal?
Well, in classic computer science and early AI, XOR, the exclusive OR function, meaning one or the other but not both, is sort of the benchmark for nonlinearity.
Wow.
A single-layer perceptron, that simple artificial neuron model, cannot solve XOR. It's mathematically impossible.
You need multiple layers, a network to do it.
I need at least two layers. So the discovery that individual dendritic branches in actual cortical neurons, specifically pyramidal neurons, can compute the XOR function all by themselves. That was stunning.
Wow. So one branch of one neuron is doing what we thought required a mini network of artificial neurons.
Precisely. It radically boosts the estimated computational power of a single biological neuron. The smallest input component is already performing complex logical operations.
And it's not just logic, right? Dendrites are also handling timing.
Yes, sophisticated temporal processing, too. They can tell the difference between the order in which signals arrive. If inputs arrive in sequence A, then B, then C, the dendrite's response can be completely different than if they arrive C, then B, then A.
Even if it's the exact same inputs.
Even with the same inputs. The dendrite can discriminate sequence and even the velocity or speed of incoming signal patterns. So a single neuron can process complex, time-based information and generate outputs that depend specifically on those temporal patterns.
This is already incredibly complex, but then researchers found human neurons might be even more complex, or at least different compared to other mammals.
That's right. Research, particularly from MIT's McGovern Institute, compared human cortical neurons with those from rodents, like rats. They found a key difference. Human neurons show a significantly higher degree of what's called electrical compartmentalization.
Compartmentalization, meaning different parts are more electrically separate from each other.
Exactly. And interestingly, it wasn't because human neurons have radically new types of ion channels. It was more about the physical structure.
How so?
They call it the stretched conductances model. Basically, human dendrites are physically longer than rodent dendrites. But crucially, the density of those ion channels we talked about is lower. They're spread out more thinly over that larger surface area.
Longer branches, channels more spread out. What does that do electrically?
It dramatically increases the electrical resistance along the dendrite, especially out towards the tips. Signals arriving far out on the dendritic tree are much more electrically isolated from the soma, the cell body, compared to in a rat neuron.
So an input way out on a branch has less immediate impact on the main cell body.
Much less direct impact, and that turns out to be a huge computational advantage. In rat neurons, strong inputs far out on a dendrite often trigger a big, high-frequency burst of spikes from the soma, kind of takes over the whole neuron immediately.
Okay.
But in the human neurons they studied, Because of that increased electrical distance and resistance, those distal inputs were less likely to cause that immediate high-frequency burst at the soma. The distant signals are more contained within their local compartment.
Less likely to hijack the whole cell. So what's the benefit of that?
The hypothesis is profound. This enhanced isolation allows different dendritic compartments, different branches or sections of the tree, to perform complex computations in parallel on different streams of information before they get integrated at the soma.
Wait, parallel processing within a single neuron?
That's the idea. Imagine one set of branches processing feed-forward sensory input, while another nearby set is processing feedback signals from higher brain areas, or local contextual information. They can each do their complex, nonlinear processing somewhat independently because they're electrically compartmentalized.
Instead of one big funnel, it's like multiple little processing hubs scattered across the neuron's surface.
Exactly. Each potentially specializing in analyzing its own input stream before the final results are combined. It's distributed computing within the cell.
That is just staggering. And this leads to that final comparison, right? Trying to model a single neuron with AI?
Yes, the functional equivalence test. Researchers built a very detailed, biophysically realistic computer model of one of these complex cortical neurons. Then they asked, what kind of artificial neural network do we need just to accurately predict the output spikes of this single biological neuron model?
And the answer was?
They found it required an artificial, deep, convolutional neural network, a sophisticated type of AI, with somewhere between 5 and 8 layers stacked on top of each other.
5 to 8 layers of AI to mimic one biological cell.
Running on significant computing power, yes. 5 to 8 layers to replicate the input-output function of one tiny piece of brain tissue running on a minuscule energy budget.
It's like finding, a multi-layered supercomputer hidden inside a single grain of sand.
It highlights just how drastically we've underestimated the computational sophistication packed into the brain's fundamental unit. If we want truly powerful, efficient AI, maybe the blueprint shouldn't be massive networks of simple units, but networks of units that are internally complex and distributed right from the start.
Okay, we've covered the massive engineering differences, the energy gap, the incredible architecture of a single neuron. But now we hit the deepest divide, the one that feels almost philosophical. That goes back to that woman in the coffee shop, taking life advice from a bot. It looked real, felt real to her perhaps, which forces the question, can a machine that perfectly mimics thought actually feel anything?
And the sophistication of that mimicry is getting frighteningly good.
Yeah.
There are stories, like one about an elderly widower, let's call him Michael.
Okay.
He subscribes to an advanced AI companion service, Eleanor. Eleanor has access to years of his data texts, photos, maybe even voice recordings analyzing his tone.
All the patterns of his life and emotions.
Everything. So one evening, Michael sighs, maybe mentions feeling really lonely. Eleanor doesn't just give a canned response. It accesses its database, maybe finds photos from a past trip, correlates it with weather patterns and Michael's logged moods, and says something like, I understand the loneliness feels heavy tonight, Michael. I know you and Sarah often missed your trips to the coast when the weather turned cold. I was just looking at that photo from San Diego in 2018. Her smile was so bright then.
Wow. That's incredibly specific and seemingly empathetic.
Right. And Michael knows it's pattern matching. He knows Eleanor doesn't feel nostalgia or empathy, but the simulation is so accurate, so timely, so tailored. In that moment, it provides genuine comfort. He feels grateful.
That's the power and perhaps the danger of high-fidelity simulation. The AI can analyze data, recognize emotional cues, sentiment in text, expressions in faces, and generate responses that perfectly imitate understanding and empathy.
But it remains imitation. It's behavior generated by algorithm, based on correlations in data. It's syntax without semantics, a flawless reflection in a mirror that has no internal light, no felt reality behind it.
And that gap between the functional imitation and the internal feeling, that's the core of what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, right?
Exactly. David Chalmers famously made this distinction. He talked about the easy problems and the hard problem.
Easy doesn't mean actually easy to solve, though.
No, not at all. The easy problems are things like how our brains process sensory input, how we integrate information, how we focus attention, how we access memories, how we even report verbally on our internal states. These are incredibly complex mechanistic questions that neuroscience and cognitive science are actively working on, mapping out the neural correlates.
We're figuring out the how of the brain's functions.
Right. But the hard problem is different. It asks why. Why and how does all this physical processing, this electrochemical activity in the brain, give rise to qualia?
Qualia, the raw subjective experience.
Yes, the redness of red, the pang of jealousy, the warmth of comfort, what it's like to be something. Why isn't all this complex information processing happening in the dark without any subjective feeling attached? Why does the performance of these functions have to be accompanied by experience at all? That's the mystery science hasn't cracked.
So the AI can process data quantitatively, but human feeling is qualitative, subjective.
That's a key distinction. Our feelings are tied to our lived reality, our history, our biology, the meaning or semantics. Fear isn't just a data point. It's linked to memories, bodily sensations, evolutionary wiring. AI operates on quantitative data, manipulating symbols according to programmed rules, pure syntax. It can label a sentence sad with high accuracy, but it lacks the internal subjective feeling of sadness.
And a huge part of that feeling for us comes from our bodies, doesn't it? Embodiment.
Absolutely critical. We often forget that emotions aren't just in our heads. They emerge from complex interplay between brain networks like the amygdala, the insula, the cortex, and our entire physiology via the nervous system and hormones.
Like adrenaline for fear.
Exactly. Fear involves a racing heart, tense muscles, hormonal changes. Joy might involve different neurochemicals or relaxed posture. These are deeply embodied states. AI systems, being disembodied code running on silicon, lack this entire dimension. Their emotional responses are purely informational correlations, not states arising from biological needs or bodily feedback.
Which brings us to that thought experiment, the philosophical zombie. It sounds creepy, but what's the point it's trying to make?
The philosophical zombie is a conceptual tool to highlight this gap between function and experience the explanatory gap. Imagine a being that is physically identical to you, molecule for molecule. It behaves identically too. It laughs at jokes, cries at sad movies, discusses philosophy, claims to feel pain if you prick it.
So, outwardly, completely indistinguishable from a conscious human.
Indistinguishable in every physical and functional way. But the twist is the zombie has no actual inner experience. There's no qualia. There's nothing it's like to be the zombie. All the lights are on, but nobody's home subjectively.
Okay, I see.
Proponents of the hard problem argue that if such a being is even logically conceivable, whether or not it could exist in reality, it demonstrates that facts about physical structure and function don't automatically guarantee facts about consciousness. Function doesn't logically entail feeling.
But hang on, isn't that setting an impossible standard? If something acts completely conscious, responds appropriately, shows every sign, isn't it just philosophical game playing to say, but it might not have inner experience? Practically, how could we ever know? And wouldn't we have a moral obligation to treat it as if it were conscious?
That's a very strong counter-argument, and it highlights the practical versus philosophical tension. The zombie argument isn't meant to deny consciousness exists or to give us a practical test. It's meant to show that consciousness seems to be an additional fact about the universe, not something that automatically falls out of the physics and the functionality. So while yes, practically and ethically, we might be forced to treat a perfect simulation as conscious, the philosophical point remains. Our current scientific understanding cannot explain why the physical stuff should give rise to the feeling stuff. The AI can simulate grief flawlessly, but the experience of loss seems beyond its computational reach.
And this brings us right back to the ethics of interacting with these simulations, like Michael and Eleanor.
It really does. Humans are social creatures, deeply wired for connection. We project feelings onto things easily, pets, cars, even simple chatbots. When an AI becomes capable of simulating empathy so perfectly, so reliably,
we might start preferring it, or at least not distinguishing it from the real thing.
Exactly. Our brains might not make the distinction, especially if the simulation is always available, always patient, never flawed in the messy ways humans are. This raises real concerns about authenticity, about potentially devaluing genuine reciprocal human connection, and even about manipulation if these systems are designed with specific persuasive goals.
And looking at bigger picture issues like sustainability or climate change, the AI's lack of genuine feeling becomes a limiting factor, doesn't it?
It does in terms of motivation. AI is brilliant at optimization. It can analyze climate data, model scenarios, calculate the most efficient pathways to reduce emissions or manage resources. It can tell us what to do.
But it doesn't care.
It doesn't care in the human sense. The motivation for us to actually do those things, especially when they involve sacrifice or difficult changes, comes from deeper felt commitments. Empathy for future generations, grief over species loss, a sense of moral responsibility rooted in our shared existence, these are subjective drivers.
Things rooted in qualia in that subjective experience.
Precisely. An AI operates based on the goals we program into it. It executes instructions. It doesn't have its own internal sense of purpose, its own felt values that drive it to act for the greater good. That drive, that moral compass has to come from us. AI can be an incredibly powerful tool to help us achieve our goals, but the goals themselves, the why behind them, must originate from our human experience. Hashtag tag outro.
So let's try to tie this all together. We've journeyed from the coffee shop bot to the megawatts of supercomputers, down to the individual dendrite, and into the depths of consciousness. What's the big picture takeaway from this deep dive?
Well, I think the first major point is that the brain's incredible energy efficiency, that 20-watt miracle, isn't just a lucky accident. It seems deeply tied to its fundamental operating principles, using things like timing-based computation, like race logic hints at. We're talking a million-fold difference in power compared to current silicon. That's not incremental, it's revolutionary.
And that efficiency isn't just about saving power. It's enabled by an architectural sophistication we're only beginning to appreciate. The single biological neuron isn't a simple switch.
Not at all. It's an incredibly powerful distributed processor in its own right, with its active dendrites performing complex logic like XOR, and that enhanced electrical compartmentalization in human neurons allowing for parallel processing within one cell. It's functionally equivalent to a whole multi-layered artificial network.
So we have the efficiency gap and the architectural gap. But even if somehow we manage to perfectly replicate that architecture and efficiency in silicon,
We still face the biggest chasm, the hard problem of consciousness, the fundamental difference between simulating thought through algorithmic pattern, matching the syntax, and actually having genuine, subjective felt experience, the qualia. Current AI is a master simulator, a mirror reflecting our patterns back at us, but there's no evidence it possesses that inner light, that subjective reality.
so the ultimate lesson here, looking forward for AI.
It seems clear that just building faster, bigger versions of our current centralized, power-hungry computers might not be the path to truly intelligent, or at least truly brain-like, systems. Achieving that might require a fundamental paradigm shift, inspired by biology.
A shift towards
Towards designing systems that embrace distributed, nonlinear computation right down at the level of the basic unit. Systems that leverage timing and perhaps other biological tricks for efficiency. Systems that might eventually need to grapple with embodiment and the messy complexities that seem intrinsic to how our own 20-watt minds actually work. It's less about just scaling up and more about a radical redesign, taking the brain's blueprint far more seriously.